So welcome everyone to the IIRSM South East of England branch meeting. This is the final one of the year. So thank you for coming along today. I know it's a busy period for everybody. I'm really delighted to welcome Dr. Shelley Stiles today. Dr. Shelley Stiles is Partner Director at Gateway Consultants, Health, Safety and Wellbeing. And she's going to talk to us about using virtual reality. So the webinar is being recorded and it will be hosted on the member hub at the end of the presentation. So just to let you know, I'll hand over to Shelley. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Lovely to meet you this afternoon, and I'm very pleased to share with you some things that I've been doing in the world of virtual reality for health and safety over the last nearly 9 years now, believe it or not. So who am I? I am a Partner Director at Gateway, and I've got over 25 years working in the construction industry, always in health and safety. I'm a fellow of the Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, and also a member of the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors. So what I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon is some work that I've been doing on virtual reality and how we can use virtual reality as a health and safety training intervention. So first of all, I'll cover a little bit of definitions and some key terms to make sure that we're all on the same page. And then I'll relate that then directly into training and some of the challenges and opportunities that exist within training. And then I'll talk to you about the case study and the example that, as I say, we've been working with for the last nearly 9 years. And there will be opportunity for some questions at the end of the presentation. So I will get going. So what I'm going to talk to you about is an experience that we have called something called 360 Safe VR, and this is a partnership working between our business Gateway and also /Films, and I think Liz might be joining in as a participant in the audience this afternoon. So we have a unique partnership between an award-winning filmmaking company and also Gateway as experienced practitioners in the industry. And what we do is we work together and we design, develop and support our clients in adopting virtual reality as a training intervention. So what we've done over the last 8.5, nearly 9 years is award-winning, won many different awards. So I'll explain to you some of the highlights of why it's been so beneficial. So to start off with training, so I remember the day actually when Liz contacted me and said, we've got this thing, virtual reality. We think there might be some mileage in a health and safety context. Should we have a look at it? So we did, and it was absolutely one of those moments where I certainly saw the opportunity and potential for using this technology to drive more impactful health and safety training. And as we all know, training is a core component of any health and safety management system or environmental management system or any other kind of quality management system as well. It's one of the most commonly adopted interventions, risk controls or risk mitigations that are put in place to manage risk, is develop people skills, knowledge and experience and develop them through some training. So we understand that training is really important. It's also mentioned in the Health Safety at Work Act and lots of other legislation as well. So training is essential for a component part contributing to wider risk management controls within a wider management system. So before I jump into sharing with you my experience, I just wanted to do a quick terminology check because in this ever fast changing digital world and in this emerging space, there are lots of different terms, augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality. So I just wanted to make sure we're all clear on those to start off with. So I've got a couple of kind of quiz questions for you. You can kind of pose your own answer to yourself or feel free to use the chat if you wish, but I'm not going to be marking it during today's presentation. So first of all, quick question. It's based on an example from IKEA. For those of you that have paid a recent visit to IKEA. So they have a place app which lets you virtually place furnishings in your space at home, as shown, indicate there on the photograph. So I want you to think, is this an example of virtual reality or augmented reality? So the answer there is augmented reality. So augmented reality adds the digital image to a live view, as you can see on the screen there. So my second question for you is driving a Mazda CX-5. You can now test drive a Mazda CX-5 without needing to wear a safety helmet. Is this an example of virtual reality or augmented reality? Let you have a little think for a moment. And the answer to this is virtual reality. So virtual reality provides an immersive experience in a virtual world. So it's a world that's recreated digitally to create this virtual world. So there are a couple of other terms that are used, which are mixed reality, augmented reality, and extended reality. Mixed reality is one where there is an example would be the Microsoft HoloLens, where actually there is a combination of both AR and VR in place. And extended reality is an umbrella term that is wrapped around lots of these type of technologies. So fundamentally, the difference between AR and VR is that AR uses a real world setting, whereas VR is a virtual world, a virtual digital reconstruction. AR, augmented reality, users control their presence in the real world, whereas VR, they are in controlled by the system that they're in within the headset. VR requires a headset, but AR you can use on any other digital device, such as a phone. And this difference is important to understand. So what I'm going to share with you on our case study is around virtual reality rather than augmented reality. So I've got a little video just to give you an example of AR before I move on to some virtual reality. So that example is of Nike Fit, where they have now created an AR addition to their app for those customers who shop online, to make sure that the customer and online shopping experience is more superior, and therefore you get the right size shoes at the end. So hopefully those of you that are looking for a new pair of trainers for Christmas, with a bit of luck, that you may have took advantage of the use of AR to help you. So in relation to, we understand the difference between augmented reality and virtual reality. I just want to bring this back to training at the moment. So if we think about health and safety training, we know that it's a legal requirement and it's a fundamental component of a management system. I just want you to think about how good would you view current health and safety training on a score of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, excellent, or 1 poor, ineffective. So it's really important that we think about where we are now with regards to deployment of training. And in fact, there have been a lot of studies, and certainly some studies in the last 5 years have identified within the construction sector a workforce that is dissatisfied with the traditional training methods, and it's not considered effective at all. And some of the studies emerging over, certainly in the post-COVID world, so again, circa the last 5 years, there's been recognition that computer-aided technologies in the deployment of training can support and improve the effectiveness of that training. So what generally does make training more effective? Training is there to maintain compliance with standards or ensure that people meet compliant standards, but also good effective training can improve behaviour, improves employee satisfaction and motivation, increases participation, and the most important bit, certainly from my experience, is is that transferability of the learning from the training into the real workplace. So those are really important. And some of those recent studies have identified the role that technology has to complement and even extend this effectiveness. So technology also provides a better representation of a workplace. So that aids that transferability of knowledge from more of a classroom environment into the real world, or indeed now a virtual environment into the real world. Technology can also support text-free interface, which is really important from an inclusivity perspective, making sure that those who may not speak English as their first language, or whose reading and writing skills may need extra support, that is not a barrier to engagement in this sort of training. And overall, there is better user engagement for a whole host of reasons, which I'll signpost to you in a moment. So when we're thinking about what makes training effective, there is a well-recognised evaluation tool, which is called the Kirkpatrick model. So on the screen here is a visual representation of the 4 levels of training evaluation as identified within Kirkpatrick model. And the first one is level 1, which we will undoubtedly all be familiar with. So this is what I call the happy sheet. It's that initial reaction, that feedback that you would collate at the end of a training session. And it just says, what did you think? Was the lunch any good? How was the tutor? What was the venue? Did you learn anything? Did you like today's session? And that quite often is the extent of the evaluation of training that happens for a multitude of training programs. But what Kirkpatrick's model does, it helps us to think much wider than that. And this is where we adopted the Kirkpatrick model right from the very beginning to help us to measure and evaluate the impact that our virtual reality training was having in the real world. So as we move from a level 2, this would be things that you wouldn't normally pick up through your site inspections, your walkabouts, your observations in the workplace. Are people actually deploying the learning, the knowledge that they gain through that training to help them manage risk in the various scenarios that they face? But then as we move further along, looking at level 3 and indeed a level 4, we're looking at behavioural change and how we would evaluate and measure that, but then also that triangulation and comparison with performance in terms of, is there that correlation? Are we seeing that this training has made a positive contribution to performance, normally associated with a reduction of incidents or an increase of reporting of conditions? So I just wanted to think about, where do you currently measure the effectiveness of your training, and is there an opportunity to enhance that? And as I said, we'll share some experience that we've done over the last few years. So VR is there because it provides this immersive learning experience. And an immersive learning experience is a digital environment where the learner has this real sense of being there in person. So what this provides is exposure to situations and circumstances that you may not necessarily want people to experience in real life, because there is an increased risk of harm to themselves or others. But we can recreate that same sense of exposure to the risk in a digital world, but in a safe and controlled manner. So that is obviously a real advantage. Particularly as the construction industry does improve its health and safety performance, and has done, although it's kind of plateaued more recently. A lot of industry workers are not experienced to the same level of risk, same level of harm, or indeed some of the significant fatalities and multiple catastrophic events that generations past have experienced. So therefore, people perhaps can feel a little bit more complacent with that level of risk. Now, the other thing that virtual reality provides is something that we call presence, and psychological presence is more of the academic term to support that. And I'm just going to read with you a little quote here about what presence really means. So this is when your body, so your physical being and your cognitive processing, so your physical body and your brain, and the way that you process information through all of your many senses, they interact with the virtual world in the same way as they would do within a real world. So your brain feels that you are present, and that exposure that you're getting to the digital scenario is actually a real scenario. So it makes it feel then relayed in your brain like it's a real memory, a real experience. And it's as close to a real experience as you can get. So obviously there are lots of benefits in that in terms of delivering training and developing skills in the workplace. Now, there are many studies that have been undertaken across lots of different sectors in education, mining, and all sorts of industrial sectors around the improved memory recall of knowledge and facts following the use of virtual reality training tools. And this is really important. Some studies say that actually the increase is an 120% more than what you would expect in direct comparison with normal health and safety training. And some of the highest studies have shown that there is up to a 300% increase in memory recall. We certainly follow up on training some months down the line, and certainly we have shared a similar experience that people have been able to recall explicit facts and knowledge that were included in the virtual reality training sessions some months down the line, which they couldn't do if it was traditional training. The other thing is that it's innovative, it's enjoyable, and these are the feedback that we get from the learners that have been through the training programs. And also, immersive learning is very good for skills-based practice, so where we want people to actually be exposed time and time again and practice in an efficient and a controlled and safe environment. The use of virtual reality does provide that opportunity. Now, all of what we're talking about here is often wrapped around the term that's called embodied cognition. So what this means is the way that our body, our brain, and the world around us interrelate and react to each other to make sense and process and indeed decide how we're going to behave and conduct things going forward. So virtual reality can substantially help with that embodied cognition, which is why it has such a positive impact on behaviour and indeed, therefore, on improved health and safety performance. As with all things that are new, there are some kind of pitfalls or some challenges that we have certainly come across and also need to be mindful of. So these are the advice that we'd like to share. So when people are in a headset, we need to make sure that they are in a safe space, that they're not going to walk into anything, they're not going to fall over anything, and certainly they're not going to hurt themselves or others. So making sure that the training environment is suitable and that you provide a safe space. We certainly do not encourage and we strongly advise all of our clients to make sure that people are sitting down when they are wearing a headset. And indeed, the trainer and the facilitator who's looking after the learners is responsible for their safety whilst in that space. Because if they're wearing headphones as well, they won't be able to hear any audible alarms, such as fire alarms, should they need to evacuate to a place of safety. Cost is a factor, but with the increasing speed of development of technology, the cost of hardware, etc., becomes less of a challenge year on year. But an investment into virtual reality does involve investment into hardware as well as software. So therefore, there is some cost associated with the adoption of VR. Simulator sickness. Some of you who have experienced VR, whether you've done this socially with a roller coaster, with family or friends, simulator sickness is a real thing that exists, and certainly we do a lot to make sure that in terms of the film techniques, but also the deployment of the hardware and the physical training, we overcome simulator sickness. But quite often people will come into a VR session saying, oh, I've put a headset on and I don't like it, it makes me feel sick. But actually the roller coaster type scenarios are designed to make you feel sick. And we certainly do not design training programs to make people feel sick. So simulator sickness, one thing to be mindful of is the length of time people are in a headset. We keep this to a minimum as much as possible. And indeed, there is a sort of 20-minute rule muted out and about as terms of the term. We shouldn't really want people to be in a headset for long durations, such as the 20-minute rule. Implementation challenges, as with any kind of new method, new way of working, you can come across some resistance, thinking about group sizes, thinking about inclusivity, so making sure that the hardware is inclusive for those who wear glasses, might have other health conditions, and indeed those with disabilities. That's all really important to factor into any use of VR, certainly. And then also you have the ergonomic comfort. You know, the headsets are becoming lighter and lighter, so it needs to be comfortable for somebody to wear for a period of time. But these headsets, as yet, are not a personal issue in most of the sectors that I work in. So actually, there needs to be a pool of hardware that many learners can engage with and try on. So there needs to be some level of adjustment in terms of the physical comfort that is available to them. And then also associated with multiple use is that cleanliness and hygiene aspect, which we did a lot of work on the back, well, during COVID and certainly since. So making sure that a pool of hardware is fit for use for the learners. And then finally, some resistance to embracing technology. People might say, oh, I don't want to wear that. And there might be a perception that actually younger workers are more embracing of technology and older workers less so. But certainly from our experience, but also from a lot of studies, that's generally not the case. So again, thinking about how you introduce the technology within your training is really important, so that we don't put any additional barriers there whenever possible. So some challenges there that can certainly be overcome. Now, quite simply, in the virtual reality space, there are two kinds of training approaches. You can use CGI, computer-generated imagery, or 360 film. Now, we use 360 film, /Films being the film production company. And the reason we use film is because it demonstrates more of a realistic and authentic experience for those trainees in the situations that we're working with. Computer generated imagery, CGI, is very good for skills-based training, and some of you may have been involved in some of the simulators that are around the industry, particularly around plant use, where you can try some VR CGI generated. I've got a short video to play next, which is from the British Safety Council, which shows you some information around training in virtual reality. And this shows you a little bit of how they would use CGI. So I'll play that to you first before I explain our case study in more detail.
Think about learning to drive a car. Someone could explain the controls to you in a few minutes. How to turn the steering wheel, what each pedal does, how to change gear using the gear selector and the clutch, how to use the handbrake, the ignition, and so on. After this, you could pass a written test on the mechanics of driving and explain how to drive to someone else. But you wouldn't actually be able to drive at all. And everyone appreciates this and knows that it takes weeks of practice to be able to drive competently enough to be allowed in a car alone, and years to really master the skill. And that's one of the problems with traditional training courses. You can be taught how to do something in theory, but you won't be able to really do it until you've practiced it many times. Virtual reality is ideal for skill learning. The immersive nature of VR, the feeling of presence along with the ability to perform the task, is ideal for engaging the behavioral skills learning system. You learn by doing, receive feedback, and engage in repetitions of the skills you are learning. The process promotes the formation of habits. Additionally, VR provides a safe environment, one in which making mistakes is not only okay, but enhances your learning. Once your course is over, the skills that you have honed in VR can be applied directly to the real world. To find out more about how the British Safety Council is using VR, visit our website.
Okay, so that is an example of skills-based CGI virtual reality. What I'm going to do for the rest of the presentation now is share with you the case study of the work that we've been doing as 360 Safe VR. So this is where we have been using 360 film scenarios based on real life scenarios, health and safety challenges within the workplace, and to really try and drive some behavioural change. So here are a few examples of the photos of the many training sessions that we have delivered over the last say 8.5 years now. So the way that we would typically work is we would receive a brief from the client. The client would have a particular area of risk that they would want to focus on, and that might be working at height, it might be to do with plant safety, or indeed it might be a health related condition, or indeed an environmental situation. So we would understand the brief from the client, and then we would work collaboratively to develop the film, the scenario that's involved, and that's all around understanding the behaviours that we're trying to influence and to change as an output of the training further down the line. And we would craft this film with consultation with the client, and then we would go and shoot the film, and then also it would go into edit and produce the film itself. That would be part of a training module, a short training module. I would always describe them as a 21st century toolbox talk, but that almost doesn't do it justice, to be perfectly honest. But there is a training module where the real authentic film scenario is unpicked with some facilitated discussion and debate. And then there is some debate where how this relates to the learners in the real world. And then there is opportunity to watch the film again before they would move on and leave the training. So as part of our experience, knowing that VR was new all those years ago, we would do some pre-training evaluations to get a baseline of people's understanding of a particular subject. We would then do post-training, so the level 1 on the Kirkpatrick model, and then we would go back and certainly take a level 3 and also a level 4 assessment of following on from that training to get the feedback. And throughout this whole experience, we very much put the human, the learner, front and centre. And by that, by that I mean really adopting a human factors approach. So thinking about the user experience, the areas around ergonomics and comfort, the barriers to inclusivity and making sure they were taken away. Using some of the science and research around simulator sickness and what we could do to minimise, if not fully eliminate, that from our film production. But then also that whole user experience, making sure that there was no barriers to people using the technology at all. And that is the approach that we took throughout the adoption of our training. So we almost planned it like a research project, and I've fortunately managed to maintain that data over many years since. So unfortunately, because we are on a webinar, I'm not able to share with you an extract of a film clip or a 360 film, because it just doesn't work in this medium as you're designed to watch them in a headset. But what I will do is we've been very kindly shared a client video from one of our clients, who's Alan Griffiths Contractors, and they produced a video showing one of their training sessions that they then submitted to an award for one of their clients. So I'll play this little bit of a video and you should get a little bit of an insight into one of the training sessions.
Griffiths is a framework contractor working for Welsh Water on the repair and maintenance framework on the wastewater network. We break ground 7,000 times a year on the framework, and we've recognised that the hazards associated with underground services are one of the key risks that we are exposed to as an operational team. In order to mitigate that risk, we felt that we needed to do something different in regards to raising awareness, empowering our workforce and giving them the confidence in order to stop work if they felt that something was unsafe. From an analysis of our interaction with buried services since the inception of the VR training, we've seen a 22% reduction in closed calls and service strikes in the business. It's allowed us to improve our planning process, manage the customer's expectations, and also introduce adequate control measures and temporary works then to allow any work where there is an interaction with buried services to be carried out safely and right first time.
Okay. So what you saw in the video there is a session that was delivered by one of Alan Griffith's facilitators within their, some of their premises. And you can see indeed on the screen now the audience there, the learners are wearing a headset, they've got some headphones on, and they're immersed into a situation. And you can see certainly the gentleman in the background, he's facing a completely different direction. And that is absolutely fine. They're all having their own experience, interacting with the film, deciding where they look and what they see. You may also have picked up in the commentary on the film that the data analysis, so these Kirkpatrick levels certainly 4, in terms of that evaluation of impact of training on health safe performance, that they reported a 22% improvement following the implementation of the virtual reality training. So this training module that you're seeing on the film here. And this is because what we do as part of our offering is we make sure that we consider all of those other measures. Not only do people like it, so the happy sheet at the beginning, what do people think, but also is it making a notable difference in the workplace, and then exploring the why for that. And we can do that across many of our clients and actually look at the data across thousands and thousands of learners that have been through these programs over the recent years. So 22% improvement, and that's to do with the embodied cognition and also the approach that we take to make sure that the user is front and center. So I'm going to share with you now some feedback from learners, and again, this is aggregated across many of our clients. So within the construction sector, 70, and this is the latest set of figures, 72% of learners had never experienced VR previously, so they'd never put a headset on. It was much higher when we first started, I have to say, but it's coming down, but it's still almost 3/4 of the working population in construction, from our experience, have still never even put a headset on. And we certainly believe that that provides a massive opportunity to create a positive impact in the context of health and safety messages. And it is something novel and it's something different, and it means that actually their first exposure is going to be positive, and it does actually have an influence on their attitude towards training going forward. Quite often, being a health and safety professional, you would turn up and it'd be like, here they come again. But actually, from delivering some sessions on sites, Liz and I would go back to the same site and people would seek us down in the car park and say, are we having some more of that VR training today? So people actually want the training, they enjoy the training. And indeed, 86% have said that the training module that we've created, or the modules that we create, have made more impact than any other health and safety training that they've ever had before, which is a really, really fantastic bit of feedback. So not only have people never experienced this kind of training before, but they're really enjoying the fact that they've been delivered this sort of training. Now, one of the other questions that we ask is around some comprehension questions that are relevant to the training content and the module that the training module they're going through. So have they understood some of the key learning points? And indeed, 100% feedback. So they've got all 100% of questions right immediately post training. And then when we would go back 3 months later, 12 weeks, to do a follow-up to see what that memory recall and retention looked like, it was still over 80%. So again, that longer term embedment of the knowledge through the use of VR was very, very positive. Now, in terms of how this is assessed and the quality of the training, we provide a lot of support to the trainers to make sure that they deliver an effective training module. It's all around not just the use of the technology, but also the facilitated conversation that goes alongside that immersive experience, which really does make the difference. So there is a lot of work that goes in there to make sure that the quality of the training is top notch. So a little bit of other feedback from the learners. 71% have said that they have personally changed their behaviours following going through the VR training. So again, that's a high number. And we have collected a number of anecdotal stories that have been shared from lots of different clients around how people can recall, even 2 years after going on the VR training module, that the learners can recall and retell the story that they saw in this film scenario as if it was a real experience that they'd had. And we've got numerous accounts of that. So the importance of the VR technology laying down that experience as an authentic memory is really, really powerful. Now, as we have progressed over the years, we've been very fortunate to work with a couple of clients where we've been looking at their data over a longer period of time. So one of the early adopters was Wilmot Dixon. So Wilmot Dixon released a couple of virtual reality modules several years ago. And one of them was around working around buried services. It was a key area of risk within their business. So we made a virtual reality film, we trained it, and then their team of facilitators delivered this across their projects. At the end of 12 months, we did some evaluation to understand what the medium-term impact on their incident rate was. And actually, as you can see from the screen, it was a substantial reduction in service strikes. So it made a 33% reduction in service strikes. And then actually, the next year that reduced even further. So there was a further improvement on the year beyond that. We're currently now looking at some more recent statistics, and indeed that is still the case. We are still seeing improvement in the parts of the business for Wilmot Dixon that are delivering the VR training. We are seeing a substantial improvement and a reduction in service strikes specifically to this training module. We have done something similar for other clients as well, where we have been able to triangulate the data with some safety performance outcomes and understand where people who've been through the VR training, have they been involved in incidents, have they been involved in high potential events, and the results are very positive. So in other words, those that are experiencing the VR training, it is making a positive impact in terms of reduction of incidents, and also that improvement that's required. Now, in terms of this particular case study, we mentioned cost earlier as a potential barrier to engagement in VR. I'm just going to read you a couple of numbers out. So in terms of industry studies, the University of Birmingham put a cost of a service strike at about £3,500, but actually they reckon the true cost of this is around £100,000 by the time you've added in the indirect costs of project delays, etc. Now, Wilmot Dixon did something quite innovative and have done for many years, where they would almost allocate a financial sum to each of the service strikes that happened. And then basically in the time period shown on the screen, it was considered that without the VR intervention, it would have the service strike level basically would have continued, and therefore it meant there was a reduction in over 18 service strikes in 12 months, saving the customer 1.8 million in true costs associated with service strikes. So it was a very clear business case for them to take back to their senior team and demonstrate not only in terms of safety performance outcomes, but in terms of cash savings that was directly attributed to this intervention. So that was absolutely fantastic, positive news story. Now, I mentioned that the anecdotal learner feedback as well. This is quite hard to quantify in the same way as percentage scores, and also in terms of some like the more measurable data in terms of safety outcomes and financial penalty. However, there are many examples independently where people have been interviewed for award submissions or by other stakeholders. And the quote that really stands out to me is, without a doubt, going on this training has saved lives. And that was repeated time and time again from many of the learners who've been through a whole variety of different subjects and training modules. And fundamentally, they enjoyed the experience, they really remembered what had gone on, and they took that learning away and was able to transfer that to their real place of work. So in summary, really, and it's quite difficult to summarise 8.5, nearly 9 years of work for a presentation. I would certainly encourage you to engage with VR technology. as part of your training program to help you manage your key areas of risk. And certainly from a behavioural point of view, 360 film provides that authenticity and that relatability for people to connect with the subject matter, which then aids that transference out into the workplace to support their decision making when they may be in similar scenarios beyond the day of the training itself. People enjoy this kind of training, and as a facilitator, as a training facilitator, it's also very enjoyable to deliver. And again, quotes and testimonials from facilitators saying it's really nice to go and deliver some training that people enjoy, people want more of, but also it's really good fun to deliver as well. So the barrier of technology is not a barrier to the facilitators nor the learners. And there are further studies ongoing. We've had some studies published ourselves, and indeed we're doing some more analysis at the moment. But the emerging science behind this is that actually this use of technology to make a difference in training is one that we should embrace, and make sure that we adopt going forward. So that is my formal bit of presentation. Thank you very much for listening at this point, and I think I'll probably open up and see if anybody has got any questions that they would like to ask. I can see from the chat that Liz from /films is also here, so if it's a technical question, I might ask Liz to jump in on the chat and provide an answer to your question. But does anybody have any questions for me at all?
Whilst we wait for any questions to come in, Shelley, I just had a quick question on where you thought the future of the use of virtual reality in health and safety training is going. And as a follow-up to that, actually, as a follow-up to that, how, do you see it becoming a bit more accessible for people to develop their own training and sort of the costs coming down and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I mentioned that the costs is kind of an ever-changing picture, really, particularly in terms of some of the hardware. As that becomes more accessible, technology moves on. We've certainly, over the years, adapted our portfolio, our provision of the hardware to hardware that becomes easier to use, more user-friendly, more easy to set up, and therefore the ongoing costs of that normally reduce as well. But the technology just gets better and better and better. The quality of the image makes it even more authentic to the learner. So I think technology is moving at a pace. We certainly, well, Liz predominantly keeps abreast of that to make sure that we give that best experience. I know as an individual, many years ago, I just went down to the local shop and bought a cheap headset and had a play. The visual experience is non-comparable compared to the headsets that we use. And that doesn't mean that they have to be, you know, the most expensive ones in the market, but it's just the whole round package that's really important. So I think the costs are becoming more accessible. I think we're seeing more use of 360 cameras out in construction to almost do like site walkouts, kind of site inspection type scenarios. So I think people will be becoming more familiar with using that kind of technology. So I certainly think that makes it more accessible. I think in the context of training, actually, you still need to adopt the same principles as you would with delivering any training. What your learning objectives, how are you going to deliver those learning objectives? How are you going to create an inclusive learning environment? How are you going to do any formative and summative assessments of people's understanding as you go through? So all that good training protocols, if you like, still exists. And I suppose my nervousness, caution would be that without following that robust protocols around developing good training, you might not have the same positive impact that you would hope, even though you are using the technology. So it's the whole all-round package. So I think people need to be mindful of, and I'm hoping that I've shared many tips in that regard. And then your other question about where is this going? I suppose Liz and I are quite surprised when we look at the data that still within the construction sector that we predominantly work across, Still more than 70% of people have still never put a headset on. Although that has come down, it's not come down as much as I anticipated at this point, really. So it still shows that there is a novelty and a newness to using this kind of technology at all, never mind in the workplace. So I think greater accessibility, people getting on board and trying to use this technology, I think is still where we are. We're still kind of quite early days, really, in terms of using virtual reality, certainly in a health and safety context. And I think where the future lies, as the learners and our community gets more familiar with the technology, we can probably build in more aspects as we start looking towards like augmented reality and mixed reality and those extended reality and those kind of things. But I feel that we're probably some way off that yet as a sector.
Yeah.
To be fair.
Thanks for that. No, that's really useful to see the sort of where we are now as well. With this sort of new technology. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in. So we've got a question in the chat from Ahmed. How do you gauge on the cost and practicability for the hazardous environment in oil and gas industry?
Okay. That's quite a good question. The key thing for me is understanding, well, it's quite a big question actually. In the oil and gas sector, you will have some risk-based scenarios, some areas that you're trying to influence people's behaviour, upskill them on. Really, if you understand what that is to start off with, that's your kind of your brief, your scope, which will shape your learning objectives. In terms of film production, how you would film safely in an oil and gas environment, you would have to have a separate risk assessment. It'd have to be planned very thoroughly with the operator and also with those involved in the work and involved in not only filming but also participating in the film, like the characters and the actors. And that would probably need to be a group effort at understanding that risk assessment. So all of those normal risk assessments would need to be in place, and we certainly adopt those. We've worked in the waste management sector, we've worked on airfields, we've not literally, but it's looked like we've thrown people out of vehicles and all sorts of things. So and that's where / films with their film background can bring some of that, you know, film trickery into it a little bit as well, but also to make sure that it's filmed safe. So I think you can film any scenario, it just needs to be safe to do so. And then the cost associated with that will be dependent on how complex your scenario is. But remember that kind of 20-minute, not rule, but, you know, guidance in terms of the studies, that you wouldn't want people to be in a headset for a long period of time. So actually you can need to condense your content, your training content. So that means then you would be filming less, therefore less exposed to risk during filming, and therefore the costs are less associated with film production, if that makes sense. Hopefully I've answered the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's really useful. So the second question we've got from Liz in the Q&A. From a psychology perspective, how do you think the authentic film environments make different impacts in viewers from CGI environments? And what do you think are the benefits to both? Okay,
good question. So I'll start with CGI first. So the computer generated imagery, for me, is really useful, having tried quite a few of these and got obviously learner feedback from a skills-based learning. So as in kind of indicated in the British Safety Council video, it's where you want them to practice a scenario, almost build those habitual unconscious decisions in response to operating plant or driving a vehicle or whatever it might be, operating a piece of equipment. So I think the CGI stuff works really well for skills-based training because you can, it's kind of, I won't say a cheap way, but it's a cost-effective and efficient way of getting people practicing safely before you would perhaps then allow them to practice in a real vehicle or on a real piece of plant where the risks are higher. That absolutely has its place without a shadow of a doubt. the work that we've been doing as 360 Safe VR is on immersive film, so 360 film, and this is really around behavioural change. So recreating an authentic, real to life situation in film is what makes a difference. So if you want to change and influence behaviours, then my advice would certainly be you need to use film rather than computer generated. And sometimes in some of the sessions, the real world training sessions that we've delivered, the guys will say to us, or the learners will say, oh, I didn't like that other stuff. It's just like being in a computer game. So I think in the context of health and safety, when we're talking about behaviours and risk and trying to get people to change their perception of risk and subsequently their decision making, a computer game can almost diminish the importance of it. So I think they both have a role to play, but in two distinct areas. That would be my advice.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Really useful to distinguish between where the two can be used. I think that's all the questions we have. So I guess we can finish 10 minutes early. Thank you ever so much for that presentation, Shelley. It was really, really interesting. And I'm sure lots of people are going to go away and think about using VR in their training now. There's a feedback form that we kindly ask you to fill in for us. And as it's the last session of the year, we are reaching out to you for speakers for next year. So if you have any topics that you would like us to bring to these meetings, then please do reach out to me or Julie or anyone in IIRSM, and we'll try and accommodate those. Thank you ever so much for attending, everyone. The survey will appear when you leave the webinar, so please do fill that in. Thank you.